Well, welcome everyone. In just a moment, we'll move into kind of the more formal section of the panel discussion, but I want to welcome everybody, and we're going to edit out this part of the filming for everyone. So my name is Melissa Bostrom. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, which I will say again on video to identify myself. But I want to welcome everybody to our third and final session on the academic faculty job search in the humanities and social sciences. And we're really delighted to have a panel of experts with us today, whom I'll introduce once we're rolling. But before we do that, I want to just tell you a little bit about logistics of how today will go. I have some prepared questions for the panelists that I've already shared with them that came from the registration. So I want to start with those, and then I'll offer some opportunities for you all to ask some follow-up questions, kind of as we go along. I'll kind of take a break and turn to the audience at those points. But I want to make sure we get the most common questions answered first before we kind of get into one-off situations and cases. And then we'll probably end, I would imagine, around 4, because that's probably as many kind of broad generalizations as I'm guessing we're able to make. And then we'll kind of break off into some time for one-on-one conversation in case you want to have follow-ups with anybody here. So just so you know, that's kind of the contour of how today will go. And I thought it might be helpful for the panelists to know who's in the room, and that doesn't translate very well on a video. So could I ask you all to just go around, share name, department here quickly, and Emma?
I'm Emma Davenport. I'm in a 6th year in the English program.
Rachel Devlin, I'm also in a 6th year in the English program.
I'm Patrick Timmis, also in English.
Adrian Linden, hi, classical studies, I'm in my 6th year.
My name is Haywon Kim. I'm an instructor of theater studies.
I'm David Ornstein. I'm a 6th year in the religion program.
Chef Nicolais, I'm 7th year in religion.
Suman, I'm a 6th year in political science.
Mel Cho, 6th year in the political science department.
Maria Wisdom, formerly in English, grad student advisor here at Duke.
Thomas Choate, I'm a postdoc in political science.
Andrew Valera, I'm a 4th year in religious studies.
Thanks, everybody. And so for everybody who's on this side of the table, if you could just lean back just a little bit, and that way we can still capture all the panel in our sight lines. It is an interesting shape of room. Great, thank you so much. All right, so I'll start the formal session now. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're with us to join us for today's panel discussion on negotiating the faculty job offer. My name is Melissa Bostrom. I'm Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, and we're pleased to offer this event in partnership with the Duke Career Center and the Office of Postdoctoral Services. We want to welcome our panelists today who will be sharing their insights and perspectives on negotiating faculty job offers from their respective institutions, and we hope it's going to be another really interesting conversation today for the third part in our series. Starting to your far left, our first panelist is Sujin Pak, who is Associate Professor of the History of Christianity and Vice Dean of Academic Affairs in the Divinity School here at Duke. She received her bachelor's degree from Emory University, her MTS from Duke Divinity School, and her PhD in religion from Duke. So we're really glad to feature her as an alum. Next to her left is Sarah Roth, who is Dean of Arts and Humanities at Meredith College. She holds a bachelor's degree in history from Southwestern University, a master's in American history from the University of Virginia, and also a PhD in American history from the University of Virginia. So thank you for traveling to be with us today. And to her left is Lori Ward, who is Associate Professor of Classics at Hillsdale College, and she holds a PhD in classical studies from here at Duke. So we're really glad to have her back as well. And then finally, to my immediate right is Carlton Wilson, who is Dean of College of Arts and Sciences at North Carolina Central University. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from North Carolina Central University, an MA in British history from The Ohio State University, and a PhD in modern Britain from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome. So, audience, just so you know, I shared a number of common questions with our panel. We'll open with those. And what I'll try to do is just rotate the first person who speaks in answer to each question so everybody has a chance to go first. So, So gentlemen, I ask you to start with the first question, which is for our audience. What elements should candidates expect to see addressed in an initial offer for a faculty position at your institution?
So some of these are common sense. You certainly would see in the offer your salary. You should see in your offer the rank. Usually the position might be advertised at a certain rank, but sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes it's open rank and depending on where you are. You should see in the conversation your teaching load, and then some things to ask about, and you may want to think about, if they're not addressed, some address them, some don't. Talk about the tenure process if you're entering at the training level, and you want to know about their sabbatical leave policy. So things that are negotiable to some extent, and we'll get into the other questions in more detail, but salary can be negotiable. Sometimes title, like the exact wording of your title, sometimes is negotiable, sometimes not. Sometimes negotiable is when you're due a leave. It's always, this is your place to negotiate, so if you can negotiate when your leave is, sometimes it's a set schedule, sometimes there's negotiation. Again, it depends on what level you're entering on for some of these things. Some things to ask about that aren't going to be in the initial thing, but you should just think about, like you might want to ask about your office space. You'll want to ask about your faculty's account, your research funds. And you'll want to ask about, usually a moving package is eventually also in that initial offer. So anyway, so I'll start there and let others add to that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive. The only other things I would add would be sometimes your teaching load your first year is negotiable. So you might want to ask about that, just whether it is and what the parameters are there. Also, if you come in with, maybe you do a full-time visiting professorship before you're actually being offered a job for a tenure track position. If you are bringing in teaching, it's also negotiable sometimes how many years you can count toward tenure. So that doesn't apply to everyone, but more and more it does.
So yeah, it's just getting more and more complete as it goes down the line. I was going to add credit towards tenure. Sometimes you can also negotiate, in addition to the teaching load, sometimes you can negotiate or find out whether or not you can shift courses, which is sometimes allowed, where you can teach more courses in the fall and fewer in the spring, or vice versa, which might be convenient depending on your particular situation, especially with your research. And alongside that, sometimes you can have at least a discussion about the number of preps, which is a slightly different topic from the number of courses, right? Since you can teach multiple sections with the same preparation, which is sometimes desirable. And so those are some of the additional things on top of what's already been mentioned.
Right, similar here. Oftentimes our offer letters include some statement from some policy manual in terms of your appointment is governed by the rules and regulations of the University of North Carolina Board of Governors, or something of that sort is there. We also include the length of your appointment. In most institutions, the first year or the first 2 years, you may be on a probationary period. So it would say that the appointment is for 2 years. And sometimes candidates is like, whoa, is it 2 years? No. After 2 years, it's your first 2-year review, and then you are reappointed to your first 3-year term. So that first offer letter will include, at our institution, some discussion of the appointment period that you have to look at very carefully. In addition, it will state that you are a 9-month faculty member rather than 12-month. Okay, so that's there. That's very important. We are moving towards including in our offer letters more comments on research packages, release time, things that are negotiated ahead of time. And one of the reasons why we're doing that is traditionally our offer letters were pretty generic, but we found out that we continue to have to revise based upon negotiation. Now we are advising all appropriate parties to do as much negotiation as you can up front to include it in the initial offer letter. So you may see a lot of commentary on release time or research packages and things of that sort in that first offer letter.
So of all the things that all of you just mentioned, at your different institutions, are all of those elements equally negotiable, or are some of them more negotiable than others?
So usually salaries have salary ranges, so, you know, there's gonna, so I know that like, I try to negotiate to figure out where the topmost is, or at least where they're telling me where the topmost is on the board, and see what I can, you know, so, but then there's usually a point where you can't go beyond that because then you're edging into the next rank of ranking for their salary system. So salary can be negotiable. This is not quite answering the question, but I thought of one other thing to add to it. So like depending on where you are, let's say you got a job early, you got lucky and you're still writing the dissertation and you went on the job market and you're not quite done with the dissertation. That's where the sort of negotiating your teaching load to like have a lower teaching load to finish that dissertation is completely something you should at least ask about. So that's, again, another negotiable place for teaching load, especially if there's a particular reason, like you're not done with the dissertation. In some situations, like if it's really like super early, some people have negotiated like not starting that year, but starting a year later. And they actually give you that year to finish the dissertation, and they'll even pay you part of the salary to enable you to focus in and finish it. So that's not typical, but it's within the realm of possibility. I'll let others answer other negotiable things.
Yeah, I think for us, and we're a small private liberal arts with fewer than 2,000 students. We're a women's college, just to give you a little more picture of Meredith. I would say that to an extent, all of those elements are equally negotiable for us, but it's within a very narrow range. So that salary range is not big. The moving allowance, not a huge, you know, we might be talking like $500 to $1,000 leeway there. But still, I think all of those things are worth bringing into the conversation as you're talking about.
Yeah, I think for my institution as well, it's more similar to Meredith. There's not a lot of wiggle room. The administration tends to offer a package that's pretty standard. Although I will say that if you feel like you're in a position to push back, which you don't always as a job candidate, I have known of people who've gotten like a little bit more. So people who've been told, that's it, that's the limit for our salary. But especially if you're able to come back with a justification. Like, let's say you have been teaching for a year somewhere as a visiting professor, and now you're being offered a tenure track job, and you have your salary history from that other institution. Well, maybe you're going to another smaller school and they can't match that salary, but you can at least make an argument for a higher salary than you could otherwise, right? So, so I've known of people who were able to, from that particular position of saying like, look, this is what I was making, you know, this is a big step down, I really want to come to your institution, but is there any way that you can bridge that gap? I will say that, and this gets to a question that comes up a little bit later, there are some elements that we've discussed that you want to be a little careful about thinking about the kind of institution when you start to ask about them. If you start getting too excited about sabbatical leave, course replacement, anything that says what's going to allow me, even though it's understandable, time for research, but what's going to have me be not in the classroom, I'll just say, just really faint alarm bells start to ring, where we start to wonder, is this the right fit? It's not that you can't ask those questions, but again, you want to ask them in this way that makes clear you understand and you want to teach, but you want to finish your dissertation, or you have this project that's about to come to completion, and could you shift your teaching load or things like that? That's a conversation that's completely appropriate. But one where it seems like you're just saying, well, what's the least amount of teaching that I can do here, won't go over super well.
Right. And I agree. I mean, understanding the nature of the institution is critical. And I'm sure that you have considered that when you apply what type of institution it is. If it's a comprehensive institution where teaching is a priority, it could be a little challenging to be too aggressive in negotiating teaching loads and things of that sort. However, in our institution, we look at what is negotiable at that point. I mean, salary for sure, although clearly there is a range that the department chair or the dean, they have in their mind. So there is some leeway there. Now, in the humanities and social sciences, which is usually, from my perspective, deemed the negotiation is much more pleasant than my colleagues over in STEM. But sometimes we look at, we technically operate on a 4-4 load, and so candidates know that. They also know, if they've done their homework, that there are lots of faculty members who teach less than that, And so we're not taking it back if you say, well, the first semester of the first year, is there a possibility of a reduced load? And oftentimes that is granted, to give an individual time to become a faculty to the campus. But those types of things we can talk about: salary, teaching load. By rule, we usually do not offer moving expenses to faculty. We do offer those to moving expenses to administrators, but our faculty senate is beginning to question that, so that may change moving forward. So I think that during the interview process, when you're interviewing, and at my institution, in the College of Arts and Science, I do interview all candidates, and I know that's not the case at some schools. The dean does not interview all of the candidates. But in that interview, when I'm talking to finalists, I really get a good sense of, what they may expect. And I try to have it open enough that they can note right then, ask certain questions, about salary, about release time, and things of that. So I'm not taken aback by those types of questions during the interview process.
The next question, and I'll start with Sarah this time, talk to us about how communication should be conducted during the negotiation process. What are the best practices you have seen, and what would you advise our audience to do?
So to an extent, it can be good to kind of follow the lead of the person you're negotiating with. If their first communication with you, typically what I've seen is that it's a phone call to make the job offer, and also, which would probably include it would include at least some of those things that we've talked about. Salary, certainly, probably teaching load. So I think from what seems to be best practice is to, not just leap at the job on the phone, even if you feel like you really want to do that. But then to, depending on what the person you're negotiating with says, if she or he says, I'm going to follow up with a letter or an email, then let them do that. If they don't say that, then it's best for you to follow up with an email, and just so that you have something in writing, say, this is what I understand you're offering me. Normally they will send you something, but just if they don't, it's good to have something in writing so that there's a paper trail.
I would say so. Some really important advice that I got that I very much appreciated was, when you get that call, don't say yes immediately. Like, you're so excited, you're just like, oh, this is happening, right? And in fact, I don't remember the exact script, but I do remember I was given a script, like when I was doing this, and I had it with me all the time, so when it happened, I could just be like, and I think it was something along the lines of, thank you so much, that is a very generous offer, and I need to think about some things. When can I call you back to talk about this further, or would you prefer to discuss this over email? And it was just like a set, and it might have not been those exact words, but it was definitely a set thing like that I'd sort of memorized and had written, and so when the calls, came in, I could just go to that and say that, and it was, speaking with the provost for the particular job that I'm in now, I still remember him saying like, oh, of course, I'm available at X time, and here's my number, and it was just, yes, that's what you would do. And then I put down the phone and squealed, and then, I sat and had the conversations, okay, and that's when I spent my time to look at course loads, look at what people are teaching as much as I could find out, see, okay, does this seem to be negotiable? What sorts of things are going on? Who's offering multiple sections? If you can, back then, schools were less savvy and you could kind of get into their course catalog a little easier, but now sometimes you can't tell exactly what's being offered when. But you can actually email the chair and say, I was really excited to hear from the dean or the provost or whoever made the offer, and we're in the process of discussing the offer, but it would be helpful to me to know what your current offerings are, or do you have a list if, again, you're thinking about negotiating at the level of courses, because that's some information that you can get prior to coming back and see what the standards are at the school.
I agree. I think it's critical to acquire additional information after you've had that telephone call, because it is expected that you will call the department chair. You may even talk to some other people on campus that you may have contacts with to see exactly what's going on, what you can talk about. But I agree with my colleagues, never say yes. I shouldn't say that because I would love for you to say yes. I would love for you to say yes quickly. That would save a lot, but no, do not do that. And I think that telephone call that comes from the dean or the provost, or occasionally from the department chair, who's been given permission to do so, we'll give you some information. The salary range is this. We want you to think about this. This is the general teaching load, as we discussed during the interview. And give a bit more information so you can take that back to make a decision. Usually in a couple of days or so would be good, don't wait too long.
I don't have a lot more to add. I had exactly in my notes, do not say yes on the first phone call. Like you'll be excited, but you want to be thankful, be grateful, positive, but ask for, like that you'll have a follow-up conversation. It may be the case you're ready to ask questions then, though I don't think I would advise it. I think go ahead and wait and then actually consult with some colleagues, consult with the department chair, and get yourself more information to understand sort of what is reasonable and what their culture is and what is possible to negotiate, what's the range of certain things. But definitely, and likewise, don't say yes until you're sure you've negotiated what you want to negotiate, because once you say yes, the negotiations are over. So.
Just to follow up on that, talk to us a little bit more about the process of the back and forth. Does that happen only one time? Do you get one more bite at the apple with the provost or the dean, or what do you advise in terms of what happens next?
I would be wary of letting it going back and forth too many times, because even before you set foot on campus in that role, then you can get the I don't mean to go negative, but you can get the reputation of being the high maintenance, or and especially if it's with little things. We can work out little things once you get there, like which type of computer you're going to get, or etc., which hall your office is going to be on. So yeah, I mean, if you can negotiate most of the things in one call, I think that's good, and then hopefully you'll feel trusting enough for the smaller things to be able to even say yes before you work every little detail out.
And I think sometimes that process depends upon the cards that the institution may be holding. I mean, you may not know that there is another candidate who may be equally as good. And so the tendency to negotiate with you may be rather short if there's another candidate that's equally good. So you have to be very careful. If you are very much interested in this job and they're talking to you about it, going back and forth too many times can cause them to move to another candidate. And it would be good if, it's difficult to sense, the competition. Sometimes word gets out. You know, sometimes it could be your classmate, you know, who's applied for the same job. But that tends to have an impact on, I know in most of the cases I deal with, you know, the nature of the negotiations, you know, going back and forth. And as you noted that sometimes the reputation of being, well, you know, you are who you are. If they're negotiating like this on every little bitty thing, once if they take the job, it may continue, and that's usually not a good thing.
I think typically the follow-up conversation to after the offer, often everything can be settled there. Usually you wouldn't go more than another follow-up conversation after that. But what was different on that is like if you have leverage of some sort, then there might be more negotiating room. But if you don't have leverage, then it should be pretty much settled by the second or third phone call or the second call after the initial offer.
Well, speaking of leverage, that's a perfect segue into the next question, which is how can candidates handle differing hiring timelines at different institutions? What if you have an offer in hand from one institution, but you're also a finalist at another? You know, what's appropriate to communicate to each of those hiring committees? And we'll start with you, Lori.
Right. And actually, I want to build on an earlier point here with having, with the department having possibly a candidate that the offer is going out to, and then there might be another candidate in the wings. Because I want to make clear is from the perspective of the department, it's not just a question of like, oh, this person is really difficult with all of this negotiation, I want to go to this person. It's the question that they want to hire someone good that they like. And as long as things are going on with candidate A, there's a worry that candidate B is going to get snatched up by someone else. So they're trying to juggle multiple things. So it's not just this desire to get kind of like the best person for the cheapest rate. Like they want, as a department, you want someone that's going to be great in your position and is going to do really well. And the worry, because there's this real back and forth, is that ultimately things are going to break down with the candidate you're spending all this time with, and then you're going to have lost any other candidates that, especially your sort of next best choice. And so the reason that I see that as connecting very much to this question about how should you handle timelines of different institutions is because you want to be conscious of kind of all the players in the game. That from your perspective, you might be in different points on multiple hires. And from the perspective of the department, this is actually one of the few places where they have kind of less information than you, right? They don't know for all their different candidates what kinds of offers they have. They don't know for however long they spend on you what's going on down the line, right? And so we have had candidates who have shared with us that they're in the process on other searches, which is, I think, completely appropriate, especially if we're at the level of an offer, where they're asking, it can get a little dicey if they're asking you, the offering institution, to wait for them to conclude with other institutions, because no one likes to feel like the alternate date. And so that is a hard conversation to have with an institution, and you really need to have a conversation with the other one first and see if they can speed up their timeline. Speeding up someone else's timeline is always better than asking the other institution to slow down theirs. But it's just a very tricky situation. I'm actually interested to hear what you guys think about this.
Yeah, it is, because, you know, at our institution, being a state institution, and here in the state of North Carolina, the hiring process to hire faculty members is very cumbersome. And so therefore, if I have a conversation and say, okay, you know, we want to offer this position to you, and even if they say yes at that point, the process of concluding, you know, the hire, it takes a while, because you have to go through so many different hoops and that type of thing before the physical offer letter is generated. So during that time, we've had candidates that say, well, you know, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't gotten the letter yet. And we're like, hold on, it's coming. You know, so, and they may have another job on the line. So at our institution and at most UNC institutions, we talk about this all the time. We've lost candidates because of that. And so we're very concerned about that length of time, because the other offer is there and some candidates will take it even after the verbal acceptance is not binding. Okay, so you can go elsewhere in terms of doing that. And we don't really require you to reveal that you have another offer. I mean, that's, you may know, but you don't feel obligated that you have to always articulate
I would agree that, like what you said, that it's, if you have these two offers, you really do want the others to contact the other institution, or you can have one that's in the work, one offer and one that's in the work, to contact the other institution, see if they can speed it up. That's more appropriate than, because you don't want to communicate to the one that's making the offer that they're second choice or that they're not. But that's the other thing for you to discern. Like if you're looking at two institutions, one's moving faster than the other, you need to decide what really fits you, or what's most important. Is it more important to have job security? Then you have an answer there. Or if this other one that you're a finalist but it hasn't happened and that's really where you want to go, then you may have to take a gamble and a risk. I mean, like a lot of it's also your decision of where you feel you're fit, where you think you'll be happiest, where you think your chances are. And so it's possible, but you should not expect it, that say this first institution that's given you the offer, first you try to speed up the other side, and then you let maybe you let this other institution know about what's happening. If they really, really want you, they might wait for a certain amount of time, but you have to be reasonable about that. But there's no guarantee of that. They may say you just need to make a choice, because otherwise we need to move on to our other candidates. So it's very tricky, and I just encourage you to know what you want and know the consequences of what you choose and be okay with that. Like if you want to take the risk or if you want the job security.
I'm so glad I wasn't first on this one. It's the hardest one, I think, to deal with as a candidate. And there may be different opinions about this, but I would recommend that, well, first of all, until you get an offer, that there's no need for you to say anything to any institution about where you've applied, how many applications you have out, whether you have on-campus interview. None of that is necessary and probably can hurt you. But once you do get an offer, I would recommend being honest with the person who, with the dean or the department head, about something, especially if it is, or maybe only if it is something that you think is going to happen relatively quickly. I think it's really important to think about the difference in time between when decisions are going to be made, or when you think decisions are going to be made, because you can't have an institution hanging out there for a couple of weeks even, really. I don't think it's just not fair to them. It'll make them cranky, and therefore they'll be cranky with you. But if you have received two offers, I don't think there's any harm to you in being honest about that. Because then the place that you ultimately decide will know that they're your first choice anyway, and that doesn't hurt you. And it might give you some negotiating power, a little bit with that with both institutions.
Yeah, but I think that's a different thing, right, to say that that you have these two offers you're deciding between, and to say, oh, I have your offer, but I'm waiting to see if someone, that's a very different kind of color. So, and again, it's just real hard to communicate. And I would just say, I wonder if this would be helpful, because we've mentioned sort of too long and that kind of thing. I think that my institution expects a response, a pretty solid response, maybe a part of the negotiating still, but pretty much within a week of the phone call, we should have things tidied up. So there might be some back and forth the next week. So when we're talking about don't leave them hanging for very long, that's the problem, is that you might even have an on-campus visit at another institution that's happening, say, a week or 2 weeks from the on-campus visit you just did, but then you might turn around and get the offer in the intervening period. And what I'm saying is that normally a week is about what you have to respond. And so you can kind of say, I would need an extra week before I can respond to you, and kind of leave it like that. I have a couple things going on in my life right now that I just want to make sure before and you maybe will get that. But asking from the initial offer, asking for more than 2 weeks is an eternity.
Yeah, it is.
So we've been talking about, the challenges of dealing with kind of
an offer and being a finalist for another position. But there was also a question, do you have any leverage? Can you negotiate if you only have one offer? And so I want to start with Carlton.
Yeah, I think so, because that's the best type of negotiation for me, because I'm looking at the talent of the person, and not whether they have another offer. I'm willing to negotiate, in terms of, I want this person because of their skill set. So let's talk about that. I'm willing to negotiate based upon that. I prefer that, and not to have to negotiate because there's another offer in terms of that. So I would say yes, definitely.
Agreed. I think you do have negotiating power, and I would say, within reason, don't undervalue yourself. And I'd say that particularly to women who don't always ask or don't always, really press or ask questions and find out where those boundaries lie. That you should value yourself. You should value that they're valuing you. They're telling you they value you. They've chosen you, and so definitely have room for negotiation. I think where it's tricky, and I've learned this through the years, different people, if you have a skill, if you have the soft skills of reading personality very well and reading kind of context very well, that'll go a long way, so you might want to find somebody who does do that and help you think about those things prior to interviews and these kinds of things. But so I, for instance, there's one dean I worked with who would be offended and annoyed if you negotiated, like their offer was always the final offer. So, learning to read that, which is bad, like that's just not the way you should do it, so, but that's a whole other story. But there's some people who, that might be how they are, and you need to kind of read, you can ask a few soft questions, and if the thing is no, that's an indication that maybe you don't want to push anymore because then you're going to annoy them. Whereas somebody else, which I think is the way a team should be, is actually respects somebody asking and pushing and negotiating and valuing themselves. And so they're not offended, they don't see it disrespect, but you kind of need to read those signs to then navigate this well. Like, are they gonna, is it a wall right away? Well, that tells you something. If there's a give and take, well, that tells you something. So.
I think though, so to get back to something Carlton said earlier, even if there's a second place candidate kind of in the wings, they're a second place candidate.
Right.
To get a faculty search committee to agree on somebody is not an easy thing. And so, and as you said, don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate how much leverage that does give you. They have agonized over this decision, and they really don't want to go back to do it again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, even if that's your only offer, I mean, exactly what you said too, you don't want to be perceived as, you want to read the person who you're talking with, because deans do get cranky and annoyed and offended, even though they shouldn't, and even if they'll say to someone else, oh, I really respect that person, they might not. so yeah, that's a good word of caution.
Yeah, I was actually going to comment to your, you never have, no leverage, because your leverage is that faculty hate meeting and discussing these things. So this is the leverage you have. The leverage is that the search doesn't fail. And so they like you, they want you, and so you should know that, and you should know your worth, and you should know the person, or try to come to understand through talking to other people about the person that you're negotiating with. So do they offer the best salary possible, or do they offer within a range? And I will say that I've had a few friends on the job market who have hit this situation where they were offered the top of the range, and one person I know was offered this and was explicitly told, look, here's the thing, we offer at the top because this offer was being made by the chair of the department. So they said, as a chair, I'm given this range, I always just offer the candidates the top. And then this individual said, well, is there any room? And the chair was then starting to get angry, because basically that's a chat, like they're like, look, I told you I offered you the top salary, like, are you kidding me? I told you, like, move on, and so, and I think the individual that I'm talking about was a woman, and I think she was thinking, like, I just want to really make sure that I'm negotiating and I'm doing these kinds of things. And so you want to do that, but then you also want to advocate for yourself. And I think especially women are told, advocate, but then you also want to think, okay, is this person trying to communicate to me in clear language? We're done with that conversation. That's not, we're not moving there. In which case you just have to read that and say, okay.
I mean, if you consider the way, you get promotions and the way things change, one of the things, like a little insight or a story here, from a dean's perspective, they understand the lay of the land. If you hire someone into a system, how long does it take for them to move up? How long does it take to get a significant salary increase or other things that you get for being a good faculty member? So you need to negotiate at the hire, because that's going to really be important. In some systems, it's difficult to move up after that hire. So at that point, you have to kind of understand all of these factors. You can't push too hard, so it's kind of difficult. You say that, do they really want me? So can I go a little higher? Because once I accept this job, if I look at the salary history, you get 1%, 2% maybe every other year. So I better get it now. And these are the types of things here. And one of the approaches that I personally take, I do want to give it to them now, because I know what the future may hold in terms of how do you move up in the system. So I'm not offended by it at all. And it creates other types of salary issues with the current faculty, where I'm willing to fight those battles to make sure that someone comes in at a reasonable point.
Although I'll just say to add with that, because I was actually personally in the situation where, due to the fact that faculty raises were not very significant year after year, and I started to get a little suspicious that new faculty were getting hired in, and that my salary was not sort of appropriate to my rank, and so I did go to see my provost, and I said, look, can you take a look at what's going on with the salaries? Can you look at mine? I'm not saying I want any particular number. I'm just asking, can you take a look at the numbers? And if you get back to me and say everything looks very appropriate, I'll accept that. But if you take a look at those numbers and it seems like things have gotten distorted, as they naturally will over time, then let's discuss how to correct that. And it ended up, he totally understood where I was coming from, because this is a problem that deans deal with all the time. You have to keep increasing your initial offers because the market, but faculty, once they're hired in, tend to get, it depends on the nature of the institution and the economy, but often a raise that, quite frankly, is lower than inflation. And so you're gonna have these problems that arise. And so while this is your best opportunity to negotiate, I just wanna make clear, because I don't feel like this was made clear to me, it is not your only opportunity to negotiate, and certainly not, again, if you're negotiating from a position, right? From being able to come to your administration and saying, I now am doing this additional role, or I think that, there have been these issues of compression that have occurred in salaries, and I would wonder if now there's some room to address that.
So Sujin, I want to start with another easy question for you this time, and that is, what are the best practices for broaching the question of a spousal hire?
Yeah, that's an easy question. If in fact your ability to take a job is very, very dependent on where your spouse is, then you need to tell them that up front. To say, I want to take this hire, but I also need to, I need to look out for my spouse. And so you start that by not making a demand, I would say, but by asking some questions, like, let them know first, this is an issue and this will be a factor in my ability to say yes, so let them know that. And then secondly, like, what's available? This is what my spouse says. Do you know of any availability either around the school or in the surrounding area? Do you have any connections? Do you have any names or places that I might, and so like open it up as a question in a conversation while also letting them know this is a significant factor in my decision.
Yeah, I would say too, some, I know NC State and UNC have official spousal hiring practices or policies, so do a little bit of homework on that. And I would say that there are places where colleges and universities are located that they are not surprised when that happens, because how many places are there to work in Kalamazoo, Michigan? That's a real example. I don't know, there might be, I haven't been there, but a colleague of mine was able, and that's Kalamazoo College is a small college, but she was able to get her spouse on faculty, like a job sharing thing, and then ultimately as a full-time faculty member. So I think that places that, again, don't have a lot of opportunities for spouses in the area, those institutions are maybe not, I don't know, it might be too strong to say they're expecting it, but they won't be shocked when you bring that up.
Yeah, in some ways, I think sometimes the small sort of isolated colleges recognize this, and they also sometimes have problems with faculty retention. And so knowing that they can set up a situation for you that will make you happy, that will cause you to want to really stay for a long time, is something that they're willing to do. As long as, just to be clear, what you're expecting off the bat isn't 2 tenure track positions.
Right.
Because most institutions can't suddenly magic up another tenure line. So that is a conversation that you and your partner have to have about what kinds of things you'd be willing to work out between you in terms of, what kinds of positions would be acceptable. But yes, I've known a couple who shared a position and then eventually were able to grow the department to the point that the administration was happy to then another tenure line appeared for that spouse. So more commonly, I've seen where one person is hired and the other one is an instructor, especially if they're in a different department. It's possible, but it's a little tricky to get other departments to agree to have a tenure line in them. But to have an instructor, that's more likely. Even a contract that's fairly regular, I've seen happen. And I will say as well, all of this discussion is very different at the senior level, where suddenly you can find spousal hires with tenure and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not unusual for me to have this conversation during an interview. Candidates sometimes put that out there. They're going to do a spousal hire as possible. And so it's always, as you noted, at what level, in terms of doing that. And we're fortunate to be in this particular area. We have a lot of institutions. And I think we oftentimes get calls about spousal hires. And also the industry here, we have a good network where we have placed spouses out in industry. And that has helped our case. But I think that institutions that have very strong recruitment, retention programs for faculty, that's something that they have to consider. Because if you want to recruit and retain good faculty, you have to deal with the spousal situation to recommend that.
I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience as well. I'm happy to take some follow-up questions if there are some. Susan?
So based on my conversations with other postdocs in the department, if they're very not very flexible about the salary, you can negotiate on the research fund. How much is like an appropriate amount to ask, and how do you find out that amount?
That's a challenging one. Well, it's such an individual thing, and I find that once again in the humanities and social sciences, it's a lot easier than in the STEM areas, because we know what they want. But when you talk about the research packages, you talk about release time as being part of that, and what type of research fund is available, particularly during the first 1 to 2 years. And it's based upon what the person is doing, their area of research, the types of resources that they need. Do they need graduate assistants and things of that sort? You try to put all of that in to help that new faculty member continue their research. So it's not always funds or money. It's other types of things that can go into that. Research space. outside of the office, graduate assistants, things of that sort come into play, particularly in the humanities. I have recruited musicians, and they'll ask for interesting things, you know. So soundproof this and soundproof that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's different. So we try to meet their needs that way. So it's a challenge to say how much, if you're looking at actual funds, how much money do you invest based upon the nature of your research.
Yeah, to me, that's more of a conversation with the person, so, you know, asking about what the process is there, you know, is it something where you apply every year for funds, or, you know, how exactly does it work at your institution is a good question. Because it is very individual.
Usually you can ask them, or aren't you like, what is the typical research fund? So there's, I mean, different institutions are different. Like at my institution, it's a set fund that everybody gets. So then you could negotiate on the front end, but if other people find out that you have more than them, it's a, you know, it makes for unhappiness. But then you're like, well, you didn't negotiate on the front end about this. But you know, so it is a negotiable point. I think what's more, like I know as deans, they're more happy and able to do a one-off than something that's constant. So a salary is constant, so you can hit that ceiling and then you really can't go back. Or sometimes a research fund, that's a yearly thing in my school, so it's a flat thing that everybody gets. And so if you get double what everybody gets every year, that's like, to the budget, that's a long-standing cost. Whereas, so my institution does pay moving costs. And so, you know, I moved during the year of the recession, and I was going to lose money on my house. So they, you know, so like when I had already gotten this top salary, and they told me I was at the top end, I was like, stop, and I didn't press anymore. I was like, so what else is possible? They're like, well, we can up your moving expenses because we know, you know, because they knew that I was going to lose money on my house. So those one-offs are also possible. Or it's just a one-time thing rather than something that's every year a payment.
Right, so things like if you have a research trip already planned, something like that, you can ask for.
Yeah, if you have a big international trip that you need, you know there's going to be more money you need for that, asking for that one time.
Are there times when an offer is retracted during negotiation?
Just for the video camera, are there times when an offer is retracted during the negotiation?
I mean, yes. I mean, it's rare. Recently, we were in negotiations and we made an offer, and the offer was pretty much understood it was going to be accepted, but the person was somewhere else in the world, in Africa or somewhere, and they all of a sudden started making additional demands. Well, I need to travel back and forth to do this, you know, can we do this? And we said yes once, and something else came, and after that, I said no. We can no longer do these types of things, and we are retracting the offer. Because I could see you were going down a path that would never end. And so it's unusual, I think, but sometimes things can come into play that you have to think about the institution overall. If it's going to jeopardize or the institution in any way, you may need to do that. Which I think is rare.
Yeah, it seems like the stories that I've heard are often of negotiations that are going too long, and then eventually, again, the administration just says no. Or rarely I think that the initial offer, the initial response was too aggressive, although there are some infamous stories out there on the internet many years ago. This happened to a woman in philosophy that sort of made the rounds, that she set out like a whole list of her demands, which she thought was very standard, and it was to a small school, and the small school just immediately saw that and said, nope. And so, which again, I think was, you know, I don't blame the candidate at all from that perspective, but I think that she was trying to be very assertive and get it all out there at once, and that was kind of the risk that she took. We've had a candidate who's asked us to wait too long, and so we haven't retracted, but we've said, no, you're deciding. In fact, actually, I think we had we were maybe willing to give them actually a couple of days, but when they then asked for a long amount of time, we said, actually, no, we'd like an answer now. Knowing that that was essentially retracting the offer, because, so we've had that come up.
Oh, yeah, I was just curious about, you mentioned a couple of times, if you actually have 2 offers in hand, how, and I think, Dr. Roth, you said that being honest about that is usually a good thing. But I'm just curious, what does one do with that honesty? Like, what does one say?
I think it depends what you want. If you want extra time to make up your mind, or if you really do want, I mean, you can say, they're offering me 5,000 more, I really want to take your offer, but it's very hard for me to, turn down that amount. Is there anything you can do, something like that?
Okay, and that would be like appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so we talk about leverage. You can use that leverage. You just want to be kind about it. Otherwise, you start to raise questions of your collegiality, right? So you want to be reasonable. You want to be kind. You can,
And it's the spousal, because you've mentioned the spousal hire thing is something, is that something that like could be part of that? Or like there would be a job for a spouse here, or would that be actually later than you'd want to have that conversation? Would you want to put that out there like at the time of an interview?
I think you don't want to put anything like that out there until you have an offer.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it could, you want them to be convinced they want you first.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions that are somewhat related. So what I've heard so far, it sounds like a lot of the negotiation happens by phone. That's kind of the impression I've had. But sometimes if I negotiate, I'd rather put things in writing and then get a response in writing for obvious reasons. And one of the reasons is and this is part of the second question, when I negotiate something, often I'd rather try to focus on one thing because it's easier to talk about one thing, the most important thing. If there's more than one thing, that's hard to talk about in a way, but if you put it in writing first, then you kind of know where you're going. So my 2 questions are, when you negotiate, how much can you do with email or with writing as opposed to talking on the phone? And 2, how do you focus on how many things can you actually negotiate on? Like we have this list of, I wrote it down, 10 things that I can negotiate on. But I can't negotiate on 10 things. I have to pick a couple of top ones. I mean, 1 would be ideal, but if I really need 2 or 3 or 4 things, then I want to negotiate on that. So those are the main.
Yeah, I do follow up telephone conversations with email, just to kind of reconfirm that these are the things that we talked about, to make sure we're clear. I once received a list from a candidate of 10 things. I think it was more than that. And can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it was kind of interesting, I felt like that if I agreed to maybe 3 of these, I'm good. I'm like, well, you can't get everything. So I agreed to these 4, which is okay. And I couldn't do the other 4, and she was satisfied with that. So I think she started with her list knowing that, there were 4 or 5 things on there that were not going to happen.
So that's kind of a strategy that
make
multiple asks. And
well, I think that's the strategy she was using.
Actually, it makes me realize that we should clarify, it's kind of, so I don't advise starting off with a whole list. That will be overwhelming and that will give an impression that you may be high maintenance or difficult, and probably you don't want to give that impression. So you start off talking salary, and if salary is satisfactory, but you're not super happy with it, but you've already reached where you can be, then you go next to explore what other else is possible. And so you do this again in a kind way, but firm way, So, and when you've reached a place where you're happy, you really should just stop. Now, be careful, because if you undervalue yourself and you're happy sooner than maybe you should be, then just be aware of that. But, you don't want to. They'll start to get the feeling that you're just kind of squeezing everything you want out, and then you don't really want them to get to that point. So you want to find that place where you're feeling valued and you're happy. And I wouldn't go back and forth on separate things. You might want to, in your own mind, think these top 3 things are most important to me. So I'm going to start with salary, and then whatever your second or third, and then just see where you land there. If you're happy with those, you just stop there. If you're not, then maybe you go further, but then you just realize the more you add, the more you ask, the more you're communicating something about yourself that probably they're not going to be impressed with.
And I think one thing you keep in mind that, you're coming, it's your first hire, and oftentimes deans and department chairs are also dealing with individuals who are moving from one job to another, and they're negotiating those. Sometimes it's rather refreshing to negotiate with individuals who are actually moving into their first job, rather than the others who are moving from a job to another. Those negotiations can get kind of different. They're different. They're very, very, very different. So I think you should feel good about that. It's okay. You're coming out. You know what you can offer. And I think the people sitting on the other side of the table, clearly they have a need and a desire to have new members of their faculty. They want individuals who are coming out. So it may seem to be a little, stand back, but it's actually a good process. It works out.
So, Suchin, you were saying, start with salary, but you were also basically assuming that you're talking on the phone too, so that's more.
Right, so, and let me say, when I list the 10 things, I'm not saying negotiate on all 10 things, I was just trying to give you, here's a list of things you can think about, then you need to prioritize out of that list what's most important to you, and those be the things you, phone, so I think, you might want to, if the dean doesn't follow up with an email in writing about things, then you might want to ask for that. Say, can you put this in writing so I kind of see where we are? And you also then have a record for that, which others have said. People tend to, deans are gonna, I'm gonna just be honest, we're gonna tend to want to do it over the phone because they don't want to get nailed down too soon as when we know where we are. So it may be possible they're fine with the email, but there's going to be a preference for a verbal conversation first, and then you can follow up with an email. I think it's not sure the one-on-one email for separate things. That doesn't sound like a process that most are going to like. You're going to have to deal with multiple things at once. A phone call is likely the place where that happens. Asking for the follow-up email is smart to do. Others might have different.
The one thing I'm thinking, or one of the things I'm thinking is that it's also easier to say no by email.
Yeah.
So that's something that maybe consider. You do need it in writing at some early
But if
point,
you ask for something, it's way easier to say no than to say no on the phone when you can hear the person's hope in their voice.
Well, and conversely, if you're thinking about this ordered list of things that you want, right? If you get to the top one and it's salary and you said, okay, well, let's discuss the salary, and the person's response is, that's the top. Then, if you've done that via email and said all this stuff about your range, that wouldn't be productive, right? And you would have spent all that time on that, right? But I think that's also why phone call, though I hate talking on the phone, so I understand the desire to do everything over email, which to me seems much cleaner and easier, but also, it's the fact that you are having this shifting series of priorities, and so if you say to them, well, what about salary? And they said, no wiggle room, then you can say, aha, And so then I also see that you're offering relocation, given that that's only X, could we maybe do that as Y because of the fact that this and that and the other thing? Whereas you might not have even cared to talk about relocation funds if they had bumped up your salary. Do you see what I mean?
Right,
So I think that's why people really like the phone conversations for this, because I think if you do write them all down, then it starts to seem aggressive, whether it's meant to or not, even though it might just be clean. It's hard to follow this logical progression of like, well, I don't actually want all 10, but I want these if these aren't granted and da-da-da. But that naturally happens as a part of conversation, right?
Right.
So,
Do we have maybe one more question?
Yeah?
Yes.
I think, I'm pretty sure Dr. Park talked about soft questions. Can you give me?
Or I think I was talking about soft skills, I think.
It was like, it was going into, in the context of like, how to know if a dean's putting up a wall. That makes sense. So start with a couple of soft questions to see, like, is there a wall, is there not? And then,
Yeah.
what are those? Like, I'm assuming salary would be a non-soft.
Well, I mean.
Whatever it is, the hard.
So it's sort of coming at things sideways rather than directly, so maybe this still sounds direct, but like say, there's a salary and be like, can you, thank you for that salary, that's not, I'm very grateful. Can you give me a sense of whether that salary lands at sort of your entering salary range or is it at the top level of your salary range? And just, sort of getting a sense of, so anyway, so you're not going with, oh, give me more, you're asking for context. Now, whether you want to ask the dean for that context or whether you want to sort of save that conversation and go to somebody else who, if you have an insider, that's great, that can give you that context. So in other words, asking sort of some questions that are around it, but not directly saying, this is what I want, or, can you do this? Others might have other ways of thinking about it.
well, I think we talked a little bit about sort of the like fact finding that's good before this conversation, and so because then you can see, does there seem to be diverse policies or not? And to me, that's the big thing about an institution, is understanding what things are standard at an institution and what things aren't, because if you think that something is not standard or regularized and that's the thing you're pushing on, but it is, it's a very frustrating negotiation procedure. So finding out things like, is the amount of research money standard, which it often is, and suggesting that you should get a different amount sends a really weird message, right? That's not necessarily what you want to send. Some places, sabbatical, when they occur is standard. So as far as that soft or kind of sideways questions, asking like, where can I get more information about the policies related to sabbaticals, leave, course releases, rather than saying, can I get a course release?
Right.
Or how do I go about that? Saying like, where can I find out about that? Do you have these? Can I have access to the faculty handbook?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things where then you can go and do your research. You can look and see what situations people have created for themselves and then come back, right? Similarly, we didn't address it, but questions about parental leave and things like that, right? That might be cleared up by just looking at the faculty handbook, or it might actually be clear from the faculty handbook that there's a lot of flexibility, there is no policy, something like that, right? So that what is true, parental leave is true for any number of things that that going on those fact-finding missions, I feel like is the best way to come at, because then you can also come at it from a perspective of asking for clarification. Like, I've looked around, I understand that it's a 4-4, but when I've looked, it seems like it's not necessarily always a 4-4. Could you talk to me a little bit about how teaching loads are created and how we balance that with other obligations?
Much better example.
Right? So then you're not saying like, how did I get to that 3-3? Because of right?
And also keep in mind that you spent time, you've been interviewed by a search committee, you've had opportunity to talk to the faculty, and oftentimes these types of issues come up as you have conversation with the faculty and the search committee. You gain some sense of what these things are like there.
Sarah, did you?
No, I don't think so. just now I'm thinking about the interview and how, I mean, I think with all of this, you also want to just make it clear if it's a teaching institution, how excited you are to be in the classroom. But I have this project that I'm trying to finish up, and it'd be really helpful to me to have a little extra, maybe a course release at some point. Is there any way, so that you're not setting off these, you're not creating these red flags that I'm concerned about.
And I think there was a question about the issue of age, gender, race should not come into play officially one way or the other. And I think you would feel very uncomfortable if that came up in the conversation and had any impact on negotiation. That should not happen.
Yeah, so just to clarify for the audience, there's a question that came up about, are there any opportunities where age or race or gender might play a role in negotiation? And I think one common place that Sujin mentioned was, gender, that women, may have been especially encouraged to negotiate, given the research that women haven't.
I would say, I mean, it should never, I don't think it should ever be explicit. I can't think of any time when it would be. But if you're a woman and you're looking at, you met with all the faculty in the, say, the history department, and they're all men, they should want you.
Right. But they can't say it, though.
Yeah,
they can't say it.
Right, but it would give you a little bit more leverage, and maybe just to give you a little more confidence as you're going into
There you
this
go. There you
negotiation.
go.
Well, I think leaving it at the place of they should really want you is a great place to end this conversation. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.